Oh, actually, could you allow me to share the screen as well? Is that right?
Yeah. Um, Sorry, one second.
That's okay.
All right, there we go.
Fantastic. Awesome. Good. Okay, fantastic. So today we're going to go through the philosopher's lens. You'll notice in these titles, I like to kind of keep it like cryptic and interesting so that people can, have some intrigue about what this is about. This one is about perspective, right? The philosopher's lens, how we can look at life and kind of see and feel life in different ways, depending on how we or what attitude we have towards life. So to start with, I want to present you with some quotes here. Okay. This one, Epictetus. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. Right? This one for me was so impactful for me that I had it as a background on my laptop for about a year and a half. It was amazing for me. It was so basically it's saying here, we don't suffer from things that happen to us. It's what we think about them that makes us suffer, right? It's incredible how that is a epiphany for us. Like it makes sense, but sometimes people don't like to think about it that way. Like it's like my controversial statement that I often say, happiness is a choice, right? People don't like to think of things that way because they don't like to, for example, take responsibility for their own sadness, right? Oh, no, no, I'm not sad because of me. I'm sad because of, this happened to me and that happened to me. People don't like to kind of take responsibility in that way.
Mhm.
And yeah, I had this like exact reaction. I was like, wow, that's so deep. That's amazing, right? And here's another one. Essentially the same message from William Shakespeare. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. William Shakespeare. So either one of those quotes, whichever one resonates with you, this is something that I really, really resonate with in terms of concept that allows you to change the way that you experience your life. So to illustrate that point, I have a few images here of these kids, right? Now, instinctively, you look at these kids and you think, okay, these are unfortunate kids, right? You see them, they don't have any, some of them don't have legs, some of them don't have arms, some of them don't have either, right? And it is our automatic response as adults to kind of put upon these people or map upon these individuals a negative story. Like what a shame. It's sad that they're like this, right? It's something that perhaps we learn to kind of tell ourselves as a story. We tell ourselves it should be sad. It should be stressful. It should be anxiety inducing. We have these kind of stories that we map onto these images in life, right? And it's very interesting that way. I read a story once about children of war, right? And there was a cohort in an orphanage somewhere. I can't remember where I got this from, but it was a fascinating story. So I want to tell you guys this. It's a story of these kids in an orphanage who lost their parents due to some kind of war. And some of them, were in a wheelchair. They'd lost limbs, legs, arms, things like this. And so they analyzed, they wanted to know whether these kids were happier or sadder than the rest of the population, right? They wanted to measure where their mental state was at. Like, so they predicted that it would be lower than everyone else because they had unfortunate things happen to them. And so they did this experiment over a period of time. And initially, it was what you might expect. The kids were obviously sadder after or immediately after the event happened. They lost their parents, something injurious happened to them, they lost a limb, and it was, well, quite sad for them. But they noticed over time that once that sadness healed itself and time went on, the brain adapted and came back to a normal baseline level of happiness, right? Very similar to what we know about the hedonic treadmill, right? Hedonic adaptation, that basically means when we get something new, something nice like a fancy car or a big house or something like this, we feel that happiness. It's amazing for a few days, a few weeks even, But then our happiness returns to baseline because we have adapted to that response, adapted to that stimulus, right?
This too shall pass.
Yes, exactly. This too shall pass. And so children sort of intuitively kind of get this and they adapt to this and they learn, not they learn, but they just adapt naturally, right? And so there's none of this kind of it should be sad, it should be stressful. They're amongst other kids who are also like that, like that's just how it is. Yeah, my parents they died in that war, and that's how they kind of look at it. It doesn't they don't map onto themselves the story of like, oh yes, I need to remember that I'm an orphan. That's a sad story, and I have to be sad, and it's this thing that I need to be, right? I identify with the sadness. It's well, I guess in some ways I've thought in the past that perhaps misery is something that we learn as adults to wallow in that emotion. Because as kids just want to be happy, right? And so they don't care about how it looks to other people. They just adapt and they move on, right? These things happened in the past, and yes, they might have been sad for a period of time, but they focus on the present moment and they just move on. And so perhaps that wallowing that we map onto ourselves is something that we learn as adults. And so today, yeah,
I'll make a quick share about something
yeah,
I
sure, of
resonate with
course.
this. So, to combine this with like my topics from the Lucid Path. Um, so basically, I was in a 12-step program before, right? It's called AA, and basically it was help me overcome addiction, alcoholism, and stuff like that. And so I went through, like, I did a whole year in that program where I was like totally abstinent from everything. And then one day I decided that it would be a good idea for me to smoke weed and to see what that was like again after having not done it for a year. Um, and, as I started to tell people, the reaction that I got from people, and because of what I learned while being in that program, was if I relapse, I'm supposed to feel shame. I'm going to feel shameful because that's not what we do in this program, And
Mm,
so after I relapsed, even though I had the thought that this was going to be a good idea, that was my thought, and I wanted to try it, after I, told people and got their reactions basically, um, I feel like their shame was put inside of me, and I started to feel shame. Like I felt shame because of what had happened, even though, I went through this whole program for a while. And, I actually got to a point at some time where I realized I learned to experience the shame. And I
mm,
didn't even care. Like I cared about the effects of what happened, but like just the fact itself of just like, okay, like I smoked weed, like I didn't I didn't care that I did that. It's okay because I needed to learn from that experience. You know what I mean? But because
mm.
I was taught to feel shame, that's kind of just what I experienced. So I don't know. I just wanted to relate that.
And yeah, that's exactly it. The thing that we're it's kind of taught. It's kind of we learn it to kind of feel certain emotions based on what we do, regardless if they come from us or they come from someone else or they're taught to us by someone else. It's interesting that way, right? So what I want to do today is, well, let's unlearn that, right? So sorry if I'm coughing today. I'm recovering from an illness I had last week. I've got a lingering cough, so apologies for that. So here's some more kids, right? I know this might seem like, oh, I'm just gonna show you a bunch of kids and make you feel sorry for them. That's not the point here. I want to focus on how they are looking at things, right? So look at these kids here, right? This picture here, this might be an older brother, younger brother, or younger sister, sorry, situation, and the kid's saying, "Oh, look at the camera. Look at this guy taking a photo of us. Isn't that cool?" Right? He's kind of looking at the world with these like glowing eyes, right? And this picture here, right? These little girls are saying, "Oh, we got food." They're like kind of showing the camera, like it's like this fun, kind of happy way of going about life, right? This is how they see the world. You can see in their eyes and their smiles that they love their situation, right? And even they'd be happy for a deflated football to play with, right? Because of, well, they have an appreciation for where they are in life, right? They don't play this comparison game because, well, I guess they don't see that. They don't have access to all these social medias and everything like that where they can compare themselves to everyone else. They just are happy with what they have, right? They have the smile on their face, right? Why is that? It's because of perspective. What they have around them is what they know. And so there's no reason to feel sorry for themselves because they don't even know that it's better in the first world countries. It's better in, rich mansions and houses. Even if people talk about that, that it just wouldn't make sense to them because they don't know what it's like. And so they just live in their current world in the present moment. And for them, that's amazing. These little things, right? Pointing things out like this and like showing people their food, right? So why am I showing you this? It's not to kind of make you feel like, oh, yes, look at me. I'm lucky in the first world. These kids on the street are unlucky. So therefore, I should feel grateful. It's not just because of that, right? It's because I want to make a point that even in the worst scenarios in life, it is possible to have great mental health, right? A lot of people make the excuse that, okay, oh, I'm too busy. I've got this thing to do and that thing to do. I've got kids, I've got parents, I've got this and that. It's always possible, even in the worst scenarios, right? When you have nothing, it's always possible to have great mental health, right? And prioritize things in that way, especially looking at these kids who actually have nothing, right? So how do we do that? Let's get into the meat of this talk today and look at how we can do these things or like have that change in perspective. How do we change our perspective in life? How do we make it so that we can see in a different way, right? Perhaps even literally changing the way that we see the world, right? So to look at that, I want to first look at the average person, right? Because the average person really isn't very pleasant to be around when it comes to how they react towards the world. Every little tiny thing, they usually have this big overreaction, right? I talked a little bit about this in the emotions chapter that I did previously, but it's not uncommon to see. And it's, well, sometimes it's comical. They have this in cartoons and things like that when like a character's like really angry and it's just like it's funny to look at, right? So whether it's funny or whether it's like in the previous chapter, I talked about it being potentially traumatic to the kids and the vulnerable people in your life when people act like this. I want you to remember this as a what I call a reverse role model, right? And a reverse role model is basically so a role model is someone that you emulate because you like the characteristics that they show. A reverse role model is someone who you observe in your life who has these negative qualities that you do not want to have. So you remember them and you remember not to be like that, right? I'm sure you can imagine someone in your life who is like this, maybe even yourself in the past who was like this at some point in time. And so you want to kind of remember that story and tell yourself, okay, this is a quality that I don't want to show, right? So very overreactive. It's like the opposite to these grateful children that I showed you before. Like these kids, they're so happy with nothing. And there's the opposite end of the spectrum of people who get immensely angry at the tiniest little inconvenience in their lives, right? And it's kind of a funny comparison we can make, right? Like these, I think there was a meme going around earlier in a couple of years ago, the first world problem meme or something like that. It was a kind of a comical way to kind of say, you know, really we're complaining about very small things that aren't actually problems compared to what these kids face. It's a massive overreaction, right? So what can I do? So let's get into some actual techniques of what we can do to kind of look at this and change the way that we see the world, right? So the first is gratitude. This is the classic, right? People usually would have heard of this if they're into the kind of self-improvement space, especially on YouTube or Instagram, something like that. And gratitude is basically a fancy word for saying that you're thankful for something, right? The typical way to do this is to do some journaling. And what that involves typically, gratitude journaling, is writing down, for example, three things that you're grateful for in the day. I'm grateful for the weather today. I'm grateful for being able to live under a roof. I'm grateful for the food that I have. Pretty simple to do, pretty easy. And what I like to do and what I like to encourage people to do as well is to have a more in-depth sentence there, right? Or like a reasoning. I'm grateful for this microphone because it makes me sound good and it makes it so that my message can be more easily ingestible, right? Something like that can really solidify why you're thankful for something instead of making it something that is something that you just tick off as a checkbox item, right? And genuinely, this is something that has really changed the way that I think about life, right? I did this for a couple of years when I was about 19, 20, 21, and it really changed the way I see the world. Right? I have some different habits now that I have instead of journaling that I do. But yeah, for example, this one, the 5 minute journal, right? I have this thing that I encourage a lot of people I talk to do. It's called a 5 minute journal. It involves basically getting the selfie camera out on your phone and recording yourself talk about something for 5 minutes, right? And in that, you can involve that gratitude journal, right? That's how I kind of look at things right now in terms of journaling. Most of my journaling is in video form. I record a note to myself, and that's my journal, right? Super useful, by the way. I love doing this, for example, in my car, right? Because it's like the only private space that I know I can guarantee that I can have. I'm driving somewhere on my own. It's a profound experience when you can kind of have these mental light bulb moments in that car. It's great. It's fantastic. The second thing is savoring, right? Savoring, I like to think of it as the like the part two to gratitude, right? Savoring, so gratitude, I like to imagine as being thankful for something after it's happened. Savoring is being thankful for the moment while it's happening, right? So while you're in that moment when something feels great, something feels amazing, you're with people that you love and you really like that moment, take a moment in time to kind of step back, step outside of yourself and step outside of that reality that you're experiencing and think, wow, let me just take this in. Let me just snap a mental picture here of what's going on. Who is it that I'm with? Or maybe even a real picture, of course, right? Who is it that I'm with? What is this amazing activity that I'm doing? Like, I want to really, really be able to feel that feeling. And it's this attitude of this kind of phrase, isn't the world so wonderful? Right? So I feel the more you can say things like this in your life, the better, right? And of course, it's a perspective thing, right? If you can repeat this more, then your life seems more wonderful. There's an objective reality to your life. You can either say, isn't the world so wonderful, or isn't the world so terrible, right? And that maps onto the objective reality and changes what your story is. It kind of changes reality in a sense. It changes the truth that you experience in your head. It's very real. It's very real. I have this story of a video I watched a very long time ago. Unfortunately, I can't find it. I don't know where I watched this, but it was a story of a main character kind of going around with a camera, taking pictures of his friends. His friends doing seemingly mundane, boring things. Like, one of them was like working on a project on a laptop, like the view from there. And he would say, smile for the camera. And they'd be like, cool, And they kind of pose for the photo. Like his other friend might be cooking some food, other friend might be watching TV. And the friends would ask him, like, why are you taking these photos? They're just boring photos. There's nothing going on here, right? And he would say, oh, just for the memories, just for the memories. And that would make me think, right? After I watched that a while ago, I was like, if that friend came back, if that friend who took all the photos came back after 10 years, how much value would those photos have to those friends, right? You can imagine that conversation like, oh my goodness, I can't, but I remember working on that project. I remember watching that TV show. I had hair. I'm bald now, right? 10 years ago, we were so young, right? Like I remember being in that house, in that country even, like maybe if they moved away somewhere, right? Or maybe that the building doesn't even exist anymore, right? I have memories like this of like buildings that are in my town that are have been demolished and like rebuilt into something new. And I share some memories with people of that old building that doesn't exist anymore. And that to me is just incredible. I have a memory of something that doesn't exist. I don't know if that blows your mind, but for me, that just it means so much, right? And so little things like this, reminiscing and or sort of savoring in this way is so powerful to be able to reminisce and look back upon these things, right? And that's what I want to talk about next, right? Reminiscing. The more you savor something, the better you are able to reminisce about it. And reminiscing is another perspective tool to kind of rewrite how you feel about your story in life, right? And a big part of that is photos, right? And I want to very quickly give you a breakdown of how I look at photos in life, because there's a very practical way to look at photos and have it so that you can remember the most about your life using photos. And I like to think of it like this. It's a way to remember your life by deleting photos. It's going to sound interesting. So, we take a lot of photos in our life, right? Most of them end up on our phone camera roll, and often we have it backed up on a cloud bank software. It might be Apple Photos or Google Photos. If not, I'd recommend you do that because, well, if you're not saving your photos, you're just losing your memories of your life, right? And here's what comes into remembering them. I know it's kind of weird to kind of suggest that deleting photos helps you remember them. It's like this. You go through your photos and you look at photos that are perhaps not so memory triggering. Maybe you took a picture of a receipt or a leaflet somewhere or a ticket or something like that. It doesn't mean much to you. And so you delete those photos, right? Or maybe perhaps you took 20 photos of the same, group photo, right? So you only need one of those to remember that moment. And so you can delete the other ones where, maybe someone's blinking or, you know, you didn't look so good, whatever it is, right? You need one photo to remember that memory. So 20 is just a bit of a waste, right? So in that way, you're going to be curating over time a very nice memory lane, like a very memory dense photo album of your life, right? So while you do that, while you go through and delete photos, you're going through memory lane and doing a bit of work. But after you've done the work, you have this curated photo album of all the best memories that the photos that actually trigger memories in your life, right? It's incredible. It's an incredible way to kind of really remember those things. And it's a way to remember your life. Now, I will say about this that in my life, I've learned you've got to wait a little bit before you do this. So I would recommend only deleting photos that are perhaps 2 or 3 years old or longer, because it can be sometimes that you don't know the significance of a memory until it's much later on. Just like the story I told before about the guy with the camera, those friends didn't understand, excuse me, they didn't understand the significance of those photos until it was 10 years later, right? So with the photos that you have in your life, don't delete them because I've made the mistake in the past. Like even little scraps of photos, like receipts of what you bought or whatever, or tickets to somewhere, like that might be a memory for you. Like a receipt of like, oh, I used to buy that thing. I used to eat this. I remember that, right? That could be a memory. If it isn't, it isn't, right? But it could be, right? And so for that sake, it's useful to have that cloud bank software and to pay for the extra storage if you need it, right? Because in my mind, it's kind of ridiculous to not spend a little bit of money so that you can remember your life. Like that's such an important thing to me that it's just like I don't understand how it's not how it's too expensive, right? And it's not that expensive. That's the thing. Like you can get a decent amount of space. Maybe like, so I remember I've got 2 terabytes right now. Way too much. I pay about £80 for it. That's not a lot at all. You can have 200 gigs, which isn't enough for most people. And that's about £10, £15 a year.
It's $3 here.
$3. Okay, there you go. $3. That it's nothing. It's nothing. And you're literally saving these memories in your life. So I encourage you, if you've not done that yet, to do that because it's memories. It's how much would you pay to remember your life? It's so important. It's so important.
I have a grandma who loves to take photos, and she always took family photos of us, and we would all like, oh, grandma, why are you taking so many pictures, but then like you're saying, a couple years goes by and like we have those memories and like, you know, there's moments where she'll put like 4 pictures of year after year after year of the same like picture basically. And it's just like looking at that transition is really cool, and I'm starting to get it now. I'm starting to get it.
That's so cool. I love that. That's amazing. I think we all need people like that in our lives to kind of like take those pictures and, photographer friends are really, really fun to have, I guess. That's really good.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. Yeah. We all need reminding about that. That's fantastic. The next point I want to make. I don't know if you'd recognize these two people. Do you?
I
No.
don't.
So these two people they are hosts to a talk show called Good Mythical Morning, right? And these two people, they were friends since they were very, very small kids. So they've known each other for a very long time. And at the time I was watching the show, I would watch it every day religiously, right? And at the time, they were in their mid 30s, maybe approaching 40, something like that. And so they'd known each other for a long, long time. And so naturally, as they go through their talk show, they would talk every day. So they would tell stories about their childhood. And what I noticed over time, and what they noticed themselves actually, was that they have a very detailed and clear memory of their childhood. And well, the theory was because they told their stories so often and so much, and they had each other to kind of verify whether the story was true or not, and the details and everything like that. That's, I guess, it strengthened those memories in their mind. I was talking to someone yesterday about this, and he told me it was, it's basically the neurons that fire together wire together, right? So the neurons themselves strengthen in your brain when you do this active reminiscing about the past, telling stories about your life and what you did in the past, right? And so it's such a powerful way, and it blew my mind how you can strengthen your memories of your past because most people don't remember their past that well. Most people don't remember their childhood in very great detail, if at all, right? I don't remember that much of my childhood. I wish I could remember more.
Mhm.
And this is a way to do that, right? And in fact, I guess if you want to remember this moment 20 years from now, then you can capture those moments, tell those stories, and really try to have that in the back of your mind. And I guess, have people that will be around you for a long time. That's why we build these kind of long relationships. It's one beautiful part of why we do that. So, a bit of a tangent here. I want to talk about this because this is a very interesting concept here. So, I've got on screen an image of an illusion, right? That I like to show people when I talk about this because it's a picture that really demonstrates the what do you call this? The idea that you literally can change what you see depending on um well what you believe, right? So if you look at this image, what do you see? Perhaps you see a duck facing to the left, or perhaps you see a rabbit facing to the right, right? And regardless of which one you see, you cannot see both at the same time. It's either one or the other. Even if you do see one, both were versions, right? So there's a quote I like to talk about here, and that is the quote that says, "You do not believe what you see what you believe." Right? So you see the rabbit because you believe it's a rabbit. You see the duck because you believe it's a duck. Both are true, right? It's like you see all that is negative in the world because you believe the world is negative. You see all that is good in the world because you believe the world is good. Both are true, right? And that, for me, that blows my mind. And it works even on the biological level, right? When you are calm and relaxed, your vision is wide and kind of you can see in the periphery and it's very relaxed. When you're anxious, your vision becomes narrow and focused, ready to pick up on any details and potential threats in the environment. So your vision literally changes depending on how you feel about your surroundings. Like, think about that for a moment. That's mind blowing. Your biology literally changes to suit what you see. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I just want to point out, man, that's why in the Lucid Path we take people from um, survival mode to self-mastery. Because when we're in that fight or flight mode and we're just looking through a small lens of reality, but when we're open-minded and we're open to change and open to changing our perspectives, then we can see more and envision more for ourselves and for others.
I like that. That's very apt. That's very apt. Yeah. So yeah, this is an image I like to kind of look at to represent the idea of what we believe in that way. The next thing I want to talk about is reaching out, right? So this can happen in various different ways, right? There's little things you can do here. So for example, I like to tell this story. This is a bit of a funny story. It's a story of me. So this is a friend of mine I've had for a very long time, about 10 years now. A very, very, very long time. Now, we haven't spent all that time in the same geographical location. We've kind of our lives have taken different paths and we separate sometimes, and that's okay. And well, sometimes I think about this principle that I read about before um in a book or something like that. I can't remember where, but it changed the way that I think about the world. And it was a principle of if you ever think about someone you love, someone you care about, let them know. No matter where you are, it's easy. Just send a quick text or something like that, and you can let them know that you thought about them, right? So I sent a text to him saying, I was in the gym at the time or something like that. I said, I saw a guy with a small head just now. It reminded me of you because my friend has like a smaller head. And it's funny, it's ridiculous, it's silly, but it was something that I wanted to send, right? And he sent back, by the way, he said, "Oh, I saw a YouTube video with 15 views. It reminded me of you." Because at the time I was trying to start up a YouTube channel and I was struggling to do so. So he sent it right back at me, right? And it was funny and it was like a perhaps a chance to like connect and like go beyond that and say, "Oh, how are you, by the way?" But notice there, if I hadn't done that, that wouldn't have happened, right? There wouldn't have been an opportunity for anything beyond that, as in like how are you? How are things? How's it been with you and things like that. It benefits me to have these catch-up moments, right? And it benefits him to know, you know, someone's thinking about me today. Like that's nice, right? It's like how many times in your day do you think about other people? And how often do they know about that, right? And how do you think it so therefore, how often do you think people think about you? Probably a lot, right? And how good would you feel if they let you know that? If they said to you, "Oh, I was thinking about you today, by the way. I hope you're all right. I hope you're doing well." That makes you feel quite nice, and it's a very easy thing to do. It's a very kind of like it costs nothing, and it makes someone feel amazing. Those things, those kind of outsized return on investment kind of things are incredible, and I just love doing them because it's such an easy thing, right? Just to say, "Oh, I just thought about you today." It's nice. It's nice. I have a second story here, and the last time I told the story, I teared up a little bit, so I'll try not to do this this time. This is about me and my father, right? This is one of the most difficult things I've done in my life, by the way, this story that I'm going to tell here. The thing that I did in the story, right? But at the same time, the most rewarding, right? So this is a story about the time I wrote a letter to my father, right? My father's a quiet man. He won't talk much. And I remember we had a better relationship when we were kids, right? I remember he played a lot with us and he bought us a lot of toys and he made us happy. And that's what mattered to him. He didn't care about, the hours he worked. He worked long hours. We never saw it. Like that's what I remember about him as a kid. He just worked all the time, right? And maybe sometimes he would come home and he'd be tired and and I just accepted that. I was like, okay, that's what dad does, right? He just works. And yeah, he worked all day. He came home late and he lived in the house and he paid for everything and the roof that I slept under, the food that I ate, and the toys that he got me, everything like this. And never once did I say properly, I never said thank you to him, right? So after I went to university, I'd spent 5 years at university and I came back home to the family. And so at the age of 23, I decided, well, actually, to be honest with you, I had thought about this a lot, a lot longer before that. But it was at 23 that I decided to do it, right? I thought because this was such a terrifying thought to me that I should write a letter to him to thank him, right? And I learned about this, or someone taught this to me, or kind of suggested the idea from like a course I did when I was quite young about happiness, and it was an activity that they should excuse me. It was an activity that they suggested that I do, right? Find someone that you haven't really thanked enough in life and write a letter to them, handwritten, and read it out to them. So at 23, I, plucked up the courage to do this. So I took some time to write this letter in words that he would understand. And I planned to read it out to him, right? And so, well, writing it was the easier part. And yeah, I mean, it was considering the fact that we didn't talk much at all, let alone about emotional things, it was just such an incredibly hard concept for me to kind of wrap my head around doing this thing, right? So I write the letter, prepare it. I show my mother first just to get like some practice at this, and I read it out to her, and she cries when I read it, and I start crying too, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this with my father. So eventually, my father comes home, and you know I try to give him the letter and I tell him, oh, I wrote this letter for you. He doesn't really know how to react because obviously we have this established relationship and there's like a little bit of awkwardness there. He's like, okay, yeah, leave it here. I'll read it later. And I'm like, I insisted. I was like, no, no, no. I wrote you this letter. I want to read it to you. And he's hesitant, right? Well, it's difficult for both of us, right? He's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. It's, well, it was hard. It was very difficult. But I said, I wrote this for you. I want to read it to you. And I start reading it and my hands are shaking. I can barely get my voice out of my throat. I have to whisper the letter because it's so I couldn't speak. My voice, it just and I don't ever feel like that in life, right? I don't ever lose control of my physical, like that never happens to me. And this moment I was reduced down to this, you know, small child once more, right? And I read the words of thanks I've written for 20 years of thankless care for me, right? This thankless work that he's done, and there's tears streaming down my face, and we're both crying uncontrollably, and we hug each other, and there's a lot of emotions coming from him, surprise, confusion, and he just wants to check if I'm okay. Why am I being so like suddenly emotional about things? And like even recounting the story right now gives me the chills talking about it, right? It was such a profound moment in my life, right? And yeah, I mean that's something that I'm so glad I've done in my life, right? Like this kind of thing where there are people in your life that you maybe haven't thanked. It's better to do it now, right? These people might not be around for very long, much longer. Well, who knows when they will go? And I didn't want to have that regret. I I I knew in my mind I wanted to let him know. I wanted to I wanted him to know that I felt that way. And so I could move on from that point, knowing that he knows, knowing that his son is grateful for all the work he's done. Right? Because so many people are dying for lack of an encouraging word in their lives. Like people just go about life with no appreciation. And when you show that appreciation, it's just like people need that. I know it seems like perhaps a little bit childish to say thank you and like I like the stuff you're doing and everything like that, but that means a lot to people to know that they are important to someone else, to know that the work that they're doing means something to someone else, right? Instead of them just going about life and just continuing and just doing it because they're doing it, it matters a lot. So there's things like that, right? There's, I guess, larger gestures, but there's little gestures as well, right? So I talk about that little text I send my friend earlier. There's little things you can do around the house, maybe, you know, when you're passing by, like give your dog a pat on the head or kiss your wife on the cheek or something when you're passing, or just give them a hug from behind, something like that. A pat on the shoulder, like even that small little touch on the shoulder, it communicates like, oh, I care about you, right? I love you. I care about you. I appreciate you being here, right? And it's such a nice thing. It's such a nice thing. It's well, the way that it makes people feel. And to kind of communicate that, I guess it's best to kind of imagine you at the receiving end of that. Imagine someone sends you that text, someone pats you on the shoulder or kisses you on the forehead. It's so nice. It's wonderful. So give it out. It's something that people miss out a lot in life, and it feels nice to give it too, right? It's not just about them receiving something nice. It feels nice to give it. It feels amazing to give that kind of stuff. And it returns to this kind of concept of, isn't the world so wonderful, right? Aren't the people in my life so wonderful? Is how we can phrase it in this scenario, right? And so that pretty much concludes what I have to say about that. But I want to tack on this little element here. This is something I wrote about. So when I wrote this, it was like, all in one. I kind of, had a big map of stuff that I wrote about, but this was kind of like a thing that I needed to like, okay, this needs to be written about. I need to add it onto this. So this is something a bit extra from what I wrote when I wrote this. And it's the comparison game, right? It is this element of this, sorry, this modern technology of social media, right? This is what this slide is about, right? So taking things back to earlier in this chapter, we saw those kids, right? Why exactly were they so happy? And I suggested that is because they don't have access to social media and things like this that facilitates this comparison game, right? And so I guess before social media, there was a little bit of a comparison game in, upper class society, maybe like in the middle class, where your neighbor might have a little bit of a bigger house than you, your neighbor might have a bigger car or a nicer car, whatever it is, and there's a bit of comparison there, right? And so perhaps that was expected when society kind of grew up and we got nice things and we can compare things like that. But social media exacerbates this problem a lot because, well, one, you can access it anytime, any place. Two, because you can see way more volume than you would have done without the internet, right? And number three, everything that's on the internet, or on social media at least, is either fake or exaggerated to make you want to click, right? It's a filter, it's the angle, it's the lighting. It's not realistic. It's not what you see every day in the mirror or in your life, right? And comparing that is it can get very, very, very unhealthy, right? And I don't want to kind of pretend like knowing this doesn't inoculate you from the problem, right? Even though you know this, you will still do this kind of thing. It's like, okay, this is a bit funny, but it's like it's like knowing that boobs are fake doesn't make them any less attractive. You know what I'm saying? The best way to get around this kind of problem, right, is to, well, in my suggestion, is to quit social media, right? And I'll tell you truthfully, if my business didn't require social media, I would not have an account, right? But I know that, social media is ubiquitous and everyone has it, and it's useful to like message people and gain inspiration in different ways. So I'll suggest a secondary kind of way to go about this. And this is something I use right now. The second best way to get around this is to have some kind of blocking system on your phone, right? And just to let you know about this, this app I'm about to mention, I'm not affiliated with it. I'm not being paid by them, not sponsored or anything like that. It's just an app that I like to use. I installed it a couple of years ago, and it's been my favorite app for this purpose of blocking things and restricting time and things like that. It's called OneSec, right? I'm not going to give you a tutorial about it. I'm sure you can figure that out yourselves. But this has been one of the most successful apps that I've used and friends of mine have used successfully to get rid of any addictions to, or sorry, not addictions, but perhaps misuses of these apps on your phone, right? It's been really great for me.
What
So
does it do?
basically, well, it depends on what setting you use, but I pay for the premium version of it as well, so I get all like some extra features. It makes you wait for a certain time before you can access the app. So it makes you wait for 10 seconds and then it counts down. It says, "Are you sure you want to use this app?" And so you can click yes or no. So it has like a very inbuilt intentionality to it so that you don't impulsively go onto the app, right? And it really helps a lot, right? And so beyond that, there's like a full block so that you don't access it at all for certain hours in the day. That's
Hmm.
what I use personally. But either one, I've used both in the past, and both are like very effective because, well, first is the intentionality, and then second, it's like I want to stop using this app for like this month, for example, and it's like a full block. That's great. It also has like a porn blocking feature as well that kind of integrates into whatever what browser you use on your phone or whatever. And it also has a plugin on browsers on desktops and like laptops like Chrome and um, Edge or whatever browser you use. So yeah, it's
Oh,
great.
cool.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So that being said, I'd like to pass this on to you. It's your turn, right? I talked about a lot today in terms of how we can change our perspective and how we can kind of change the way that we see the world in terms of gratitude, savoring, reaching out, reminiscing. You can choose any one of these things. I'd like you to focus on one to begin with and build that up over time. You can combine them, right? You can reminisce, you can do some gratitude. You can reminisce with friends, right? You can reminisce with photos with your friends, right? I think in the past, we had a lot of this time to kind of like sit and just tell stories by the fireplace, right? Or look at photos together and do things like this. I feel like now it's a lot more about being stimulated all the time on our phones and everything like this. it's nice to be able to step back and be able to remember things that happen in your life. Because I guess the one quote that I like the most in this kind of realm is the one by Ferris Bueller in that movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And it's this quote that says, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around every once in a while, you could miss it, right? So many people, they keep their head down, they do the work, and they just like focus on like go, 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 go. And 10 years, 20 years later, they finally take a step back, right? Through some coincidence. And they're like, where did that time go? Where did 10 years of my life go? Because I never took a step back to observe what was going on, right? And it's an incredible reminder to do that in life. So yeah, I'll pass that on to you. And that's the end of this. Next time we'll go through the power of now. And yeah, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your time. Any questions?
Awesome presentation, Dylan. Thank you again for the philosopher's lens. I really appreciate what you shared today about how our perspective can really help change the way that we view the world. Um, you can choose to look at the world in like a crummy way, like it's not going very well. It's, things um just aren't serving you the way that you want, or you're not experiencing life in the way that you want, or you can change your perspective to look at things and know that, like, I can make something out of this moment, even if it's like not the most ideal circumstances. Like, I can make something out of this that will benefit me and benefit others and benefit everyone. um Yeah, I learned a lot today, and yeah, what do you guys think, our viewers, during the replay? Let us know
Mhm.
down in the comments below. All right.
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Thank you guys. I am going to stop the recording here.